Hey guys, I know you're super excited to get started with an introduction to the Cold War. Notice that I said introduction. The Cold War itself lasted approximately 50 years. 50 years that is far too complicated to discuss in a 5 to 10 minute video. So, we're simply going to look at what's up following World War II and why we find ourselves in this state of tension once everything is supposed to be resolved. To put it very simply, the Cold War comes down to communism, with Joseph Stalin in their corner, versus capitalism. At the helm, Harry S. Truman, where the S stands for S. To take us back a bit, we're going to revisit February of 1945, before Harry S. Truman was our president, and before the Cold War was even a thing. Because it was 1945, during the Yalta Conference, the tension started to rise between the Soviet Union and the United States. Now I know that most of you remember seeing this in class, but just in case a few of you were daydreaming about Warren G. Harding and his dreamy eyebrows, we're going to review real quick to make sure that you remember why the Yalta Agreement started tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. As we remember, the Yalta Conference brought the big three together, that is, FDR, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin, to discuss what was going to happen at the end of World War II. Well, when they got together, they decided first and foremost the Soviet Union is going to join the war against Japan. And we talked about this in class. We're a little bit scared about the idea of Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union fighting with us in the Pacific. The Soviets, in return for fighting with us against Japan, will receive some territories in Asia when Japan is defeated. Now, the Allies have also agreed to divide or partition Germany into 4 zones. And this is all a little bit terrifying, because like we said before, Great Britain and the United States, not big fans of communism. Really not big fans of Joseph Stalin. They don't like the idea of him spreading his power throughout the world. And that's exactly what's happening at the Yalta Conference. Now, just as a reminder, we have the 4 zones of Germany that were built up, and we've got right here Berlin in the heart of the Soviet Union. We've talked about that before. I'm showing it to you again because that is going to become very, very important at the end of tonight's lesson. Now, again, a refresher of why we don't get along with the Soviet Union. The Manhattan Project. We talked about this. This was after Szilard and Einstein went to FDR, fearing that the Nazis were creating an atomic bomb. The United States got working immediately on creating their own atomic bomb, and they called it the Manhattan Project, the top secret operation to create the atomic bomb. The first bomb, as we learned in class, was detonated in Los Alamos, New Mexico in 1945. Now, just because I know you guys want to check these two out again, this dapper fellow with the fashionable hat, J. Robert Oppenheimer. He was the lead scientist. Dude with the tight pants, General Groves, who oversaw the military portion of the Manhattan Project. Basically, people all over the United States were working to beat the Germans and the Japanese to the atomic bomb. What we didn't realize at the time was that we were also working to beat the Soviet Union. The success of the atomic bomb after it was used on Japan, remember Hiroshima and Nagasaki, led to tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. Both countries were now trying to prove themselves as superpowers after World War II. So, to go along with that idea, how do we prevent these new so-called superpowers from blowing each other up? Well, we do exactly what Woodrow Wilson said to do after the First World War. We create an organization that allows nations to talk it out rather than detonate atomic bombs over each other? The League of Nations obviously didn't work out so well, so we decided to start all over again, this time with the United Nations. The creation of the United Nations began while World War II was still going on, which some people credit to its success. People say that because it wasn't made out of desperation, like at the end of World War I, to keep peace, but instead it was plans of ending the war and then maintaining that peace that allowed the United Nations to grow the way it did. Its other key to success lay in the fact that unlike the League of Nations, the United Nations was constructed by 50 participating countries, rather than just 5. So the little guys around the world had their voices heard also. Simply put, the United Nations is an organization that works to promote international peace. This is extremely important as the world starts to divide into 2 factions, essentially communist and anti-communist. This divide really began in Eastern Europe as the Soviet Union started to reach its influence into nations that were rebuilding after an extremely devastating war. In 1946, Winston Churchill gave a speech at Westminster College in Missouri where he famously described an iron curtain that had fallen across the European continent. His Iron Curtain referred to the political and military barrier that isolated Soviet-controlled countries of Eastern Europe after World War II. Now this map is very important for you to pay attention to, because if you see right here, obviously this is the Soviet Union right here, the USSR, Yugoslavia is outside of the Iron Curtain. It's because it's a communist nation, but it's independent. It's not associated with the Soviet Union at that point in time. Now, Winston Churchill's famous speech warned that the Soviet Union was gaining power, and it was time for the United States and Great Britain to work together to prevent this spread from continuing. After the speech was given, the United States put forth the containment policy. The policy or process of preventing the expansion of a hostile power, in this case, the spread of communism. Notice that there is simply a cage put over the octopus, because nobody wants an octopus to take over the world. Those things are creepy, but I guess I'd rather an octopus take over the world than an alligator. Anyway, this cage represents the fact that the United States is not attempting to take over territories or get rid of communism entirely. We are simply trying to contain it, as the title of the policy suggests, to where it already is and stop it from spreading elsewhere. Kind of like when you put your dog in the crate so she can't get into the kitchen and eat another bag of hamburger buns for the 2nd day in a row, and then top it off with a dessert of applesauce and some sort of gross pureed turkey pouch that for some reason your kid loves, even though it smells like puke, right? Containing communism is totally the same thing, except, you know, with all sorts of political factors and stuff. The containment policy was made official with the Truman Doctrine, put into effect in 1947 when Harry Truman declared, "I believe that it must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressure." Essentially what he's saying, in 7th grade speak, is that the United States will use our power to prevent smaller nations from falling unwillingly to larger communist nations. What up, Soviet Union? Truman in the house! The Truman Doctrine was soon backed up with the Marshall Plan, created by George C. Marshall in 1947. Now, the Marshall Plan essentially proposed giving massive economic aid to Europe. Marshall initially proposed the plan in June of 1947. His goal was to help rebuild these nations, open up trade, and industrialize these war-torn countries. The Marshall Plan was originally resisted by Congress, who was somewhat hesitant to spend so much money on foreign nations. However, they saw the importance in building up Europe after the Soviet-supported communists took over the government in Czechoslovakia. Once they realized the dire need of rebuilding Europe and how much they actually really needed the economic aid, Harry Truman and the United States Congress signed the Marshall Plan into act. Between 1948 and 1951, the Marshall Plan contributed nearly $17 billion to rebuilding the countries of Western Europe. That's about $120 billion in today's standards. In the end, the Marshall Plan allowed European nations to rebuild after World War II while reducing communist influence in the West. But here's the thing. It's not all totally peaceful. We can't really rebuild without some sort of fight when there's this much tension in the world. So this is where you're going to go ahead and do your reading from the textbook on the Berlin blockade.